All right. Happy Monday, everybody, and welcome to this week's Q&A from the community. As always, we will answer questions that either you dropped from last week or that came up in a recent coaching call, and we will just jump right in. So again, as usual, I try to keep it about the same. So I think we have another 5 questions here. We got leads question, sales question, presence, relationships, and results. We cover almost all 6 of them, but let's dive right in. So the first question is in the leads, right? So this leads being, how do you get that next role? Question is, what's the best way to ask my boss for about my promotion readiness, right? So basically, you want to get promoted. How do you ask those questions? And the main lesson here is most people don't want you to ask about the promotion, right? Sometimes it's okay, and there are certain scenarios, particularly if it's been dragging on for a while, then you get more and more explicit about like, look, this is what I mean when I say I want to grow my career, right? What you want to do instead is talk about what are the criteria for you to be operating the next level, right? You can ask questions like what do you see as a successful director or a successful VP or a successful SVP, right? You're looking for criteria, and then you want to ask specific things that you can do. So if you think it's visibility, if you think it's responsibility, if you think it's whatever else it might be, like just sort of delivery and sort of scope of responsibilities, you want to ask something very specific. So the idea is you're trying to reverse engineer the criteria and then get them to agree that you've met the criteria, right? So so for someone to make VP, they need to have the right responsibilities. They need to be known by the management team or the C-suite, and they need to have great relationships across product engineering, infrastructure, and sales. I just made that up. But like that is the criteria, right? And you can kind of reverse engineer the criteria, sometimes asking your boss, sometimes going straight to HR, right? And again, you may know this because you're involved in the promotion process, but if you don't, go to HR and you can ask about your own team, but basically say, hey, I'd like to understand the promotion process here, right? Especially if you're new, right? Is there a committee? Is there a form? What is it? And sometimes they're very explicit, like at Amazon, they're very, very explicit like that. Here's the criteria. And here's what you need for this level, this level, this level. Other places, it's much more opaque. They're just like, no, these people get together and then they decide, right? But your job is to figure out what do you think the criteria is, right? And then you want to focus on that. So, hey, boss, I'm trying to work on my visibility. I'd like to get more, FaceTime or interactions or relationships with this set of people. What do you think the best way to do that is, right? You're looking for very specific action that the boss can take to check off the things that you have found are necessary, right? So in general, right, you can have that career conversation. You want to say, hey, I'm looking to grow. I'm looking to add more value, right? Again, don't necessarily say, I want a promotion, because the promotion is about you. And this is what we talk about all the time, right? Anytime you're looking for a new job, it's not about you, it's about the problem that they have. And can you solve that problem? So the promotion is the same thing. It's not, hey, I've been doing this for a long time. I deserve this, right? It is, if I promote you, what am I going to get from that? What is the business going to get from that? Because this is an exchange, right? Like you're doing the job now and you're not promoted and you're doing great. So I can give you more money for the same thing, which, on a personal level, like maybe you deserve it, all that kind of stuff. Yes, I get that. But from a business perspective, I suddenly paid more money for the same thing, which is it's just a hard business decision to make. Like, well, I need to give you more money, but like, what am I getting from it? So what you want to do is if you're looking for promotion is focus on the value you can add in a bigger role, right? If I was able to do this, if I was put in charge of this project, if I was X, here's what I can do. I can improve the productivity. I can improve the sales. I can improve the product and customer satisfaction. Something, right? You need to focus on why would I promote you? What's the value of having you in a VP role versus a director role, right? And so you want to kind of come at it not, hey, I've been doing this for a long time. I deserve a promotion. Why aren't I getting the promotion? And that's about you. You want to figure out what the criteria are. Again, visibility, scope of responsibilities, whatever it is. Then try to do those one-offs. Okay, these people don't know me. I need to get in front of them. Hey, boss, what's the best way to sort of start to build a relationship with the head of product? Because that's somebody I don't know. And see if you can work that, because those are often easier. And the last caveat, so that's generally what you want to do is you want to approach it from a value and sort of gap closure perspective. Like that's the general approach you want to do until it's obvious that you are operating at that level. That's the easiest way to get the promotion is, oh, I thought you were a VP already, right? Oh, because you're meeting with the C-suite all the time and they all think of you as a up and coming executive and a partner and stuff like that. That's the easiest way to get the promotion. That being said, the one caveat is if it takes too long, yes, you should have that explicit conversation that says, yeah, my goal is to grow, still focus on value. I think that as a director, as a VP, as an SVP, I can add even more value to the firm. And I'd love to just understand what would it take for me to get there, right? Because what you're looking for is specific action steps that can be taken on. So again, if you're new and you're sort of exploring it, be a bit softer. If it's been a while, or you're like, look, if this doesn't work out, I'm leaving, be more aggressive, right? And be more direct. But the question is, how do you add more value, not how do I get what I deserve? You may very well deserve it, but that's not what you talk about. You talk about how do I add the value at this next level, because that's the business question that they're answering. Okay, so that's how you talk about promotions. All right, so next one is sort of in the sales in the interview cycle. You're interviewing for a new job. So how do you find out the resources such as hiring ability of the position while you're interviewing? So this is the reverse, which says, okay, they're testing you out. How do you test them out? So they want you to come in and solve this problem. And again, in this case, they're talking about hiring ability. So, well, do I have a budget? Do I have the ability to bring in people? Like, what can I do in this role? Because those are important things you want to know and very rarely come up in the interview. And so, a couple thoughts here. Right? One is that's not the first thing you talk about, probably, right? You want to use that for the second or third interview where you're like, they think you're the right person, and now you're exploring whether you want the job, which is the second half of the equation, right? So, first half of the equation is convince them that you're the best thing ever and you can solve their problem and they want you. The second half of the equation is, do you want them? Right. You can do that first, but it's much better to get them to really want you and then start to talk about, well, do you want them? But basically, you just ask, right? So again, when you're there, you just ask those kind of questions like, okay, so if I understand it, this role, the main, sort of goal of this role is to launch this new product, re-engineer this technology, whatever it is. So just if you can give me a little more detail, like, I'm just curious about sort of scope and budget. Is there hiring ability? Like, what are the tools that I have? Because that's what you're asking is what are the tools that I have to accomplish this goal? And you just ask. And it becomes much easier. I, I, I mean, technically, because the higher up you go, the more that's an expectation, right? So again, is it easier? Depends on how you feel about it, but it becomes more and more normal because if you're going to be a CEO, you're evaluating the company just as much as the company is evaluating you because you need to be successful. You need to know what authority you have, what everything else. So it's totally normal at the top, right? It's a lot less. If you're a coder, you don't usually ask a lot of questions about what influence do I have to run my own sort of job. So you want to think about, particularly as you're sort of moving up in those executive ranks, right? Be more directive because you are evaluating them just as much as you. And you want to know, effectively, what are the tools that you have to solve this problem? And so just ask, right? That's the easiest way to answer this question is how do you find out? Ask, but again, ask probably in the middle to second half of the interview cycle when you are talking about your ability to solve the problem. I have the ability to solve this problem. We've already established that. Now I want to make sure I have the resources to solve this problem. So I'm going to ask a few questions about the specifics of the job. Right? So that's generally how you would try to figure out like, what kind of comes with the resources. Again, you can also make it more specific if you have specific things that you think you can bring. Like if you're like, oh, I want to bring my team over, you would offer that as a value. Again, not, hey, I want my own team. Can I do that? Because that again is about you. Instead, you say, okay, this is awesome. I have a really solid engineer, sales crew, whatever it is, who I think would be amazing at sort of building out whatever we just talked about. You know, is that an opportunity to potentially bring them over? Because you're offering them skills and they might be like, oh, sorry, no, we don't have any budget. Okay, now you know. Or no, that would be great. Like we totally need to build this team. If you have great people, we would love it. Perfect. Now you know you can bring on the people that you want to bring on. So that's generally how you kind of probe the resources. All right, so let's switch over to kind of the in the job kind of question. So the first one is around executive presence, and it's the classic question: how do I balance executive presence and delivery? Right, because you have to do your day job, but your day job is not what gets you seen as an executive, right? An executive looks up and out, right? Strategy, competitors, landscape, where sort of more junior people or senior managers and below execution people focus on getting the job done, right? So if you're making this transition, you want to move in the senior executive ranks, looking up and out. How do you do that? And the answer is the classic one. Again, if you've heard me talk about this before, where there's what you do, and then there's what people think you do. And you need to start to think about them as two different things. And when you The things you need to do are the things you need to do, right? That all depends on how strong your team is, how much you can delegate, where you need to spend your time, what are the issues. The more important one is, what do people think you do? And the answer is, they need to think of you doing more executive things. More than 50% of your time needs to be doing executive team, sort of executive activities, even if that may not be totally true. And the simple way to think about that is, I think you do what we talk about. I don't know what you do all day. Nobody knows what anybody else does all day, because nobody follows people around for 8, 10 hours a day, right? They don't know. All I know is what we talk about. And so if I'm your boss and I'm sort of evaluating you as an executive candidate, you come to me and we have our meeting, or just regular old meeting. What do we talk about? If we talk about project status, open issues, risks, support tickets, you know, things that you're doing to kind of keep the place running, that is all about internal down execution. So that's what I assume you do all day. You're spending all your time doing that. Even if you just brought all those issues because you needed me to deal with, like, to give you funding or something like that, all we did was talk about those kind of issues. And so I'm going to assume that that's where you spend all your time. Right. So now contrast that, where we come in and you give me a 5-minute, hey, update, here's the project status, everything's good. We can go through them if you want, but there's only one issue I want to highlight. Otherwise, it's there for your reading. But I'd really like to talk to you about is the next quarterly planning. What I'd really like to talk about is, I was in a conversation with the head of product, and I had this really interesting idea for how we can basically bring these things together and optimize the, you know, production support workflows on password resets, something, right? That then tells me, what have you been doing? You're thinking about strategic planning. You're talking relationships. That's what I assume you do all day, right? Because that's all we talked about. That's all I remember is oh yeah, you're talking to the head of product and you're asking about the strategic plan and you're trying to do this, the prep for the board deck, whatever it was. If that's all we talk about, that's what I think you do. It's just the way the brain works, right? So again, how do you balance them? You basically think of them as two separate things. You execute your job however you need to execute your job. Obviously, you want to move more towards these executive activities, but that's actually not as important as the conversations you're having with other executives and asking yourself, am I talking about the right things? Because their impression of you is 95% defined by what you talk about when you meet with them, which you generally control, right? You're bringing up these topics, or you can influence them at a minimum. So focus there, make sure that they see you doing executive level things. And if you do that, you're setting the right framework, and that's how they're going to see you. So that's how you balance it. You balance it by thinking about it as two things and treating them differently. Okay. Now, a question around relationships. So, okay, here's the scenario. I have a peer who wasn't telling me the truth on a recent decision. How do I address that without being too aggressive? And so this was, I asked for some clarification on this one. And basically, the scenario is, we in this scenario agreed to do something. This other person basically went ahead and did something else. And then we decided to came back and said, what are you doing? And they said no. And so, to be specific, this is about a data architecture and having a global data architecture and bringing everybody together, which we agreed to. And then the specific scenario was, they started designing a local one for a specific business. And when sort of confronted on that, they said, basically, we didn't do that. I don't know what you're talking about. And so the reaction was, not surprisingly, like, I know, because somebody just told me that you were doing this. Like, what's going on, right? And so, how do you do that without being too aggressive and trying to preserve the relationship? So that's the kind of scenario that we're talking about here. And the general strategy here is, just to sum it up, is confusion over aggression, right? And what I mean by that is, be confused, not mad, right? Because when you're mad, people will get defensive. Hey, how did you do that? Whoa, whoa, whoa. Like, they immediately go in defensive mode. Like, what are you talking about? I didn't do anything. Right? They will immediately back up and, basically put the walls up. And now you're basically antagonistic, which is just tanking the trust in this relationship. So in general, don't do that unless it's super egregious. Sometimes you do have to do that. But in general, you want to approach it with confusion, because maybe there's something you didn't know, right? And so rather than saying, wait, you're doing something that's wrong, you say, hey, can we talk? Because I heard from so and so that you're designing a local business, basically a local data store for this business. But I understood that when we met here, we all agreed that we're going to do the global, we're not going to do the local. So can you help me understand? what is going on, right? Confusion, unclear. Can you help me understand? And sometimes they will basically have done it because they never agreed in the first place or something. And then it will be very hard to answer that question. We're like, well, well, yeah, like I just don't really agree with this whole thing. And then you can get, what you're trying to do is get them to answer the question, right? Don't say, you did this, you did that. You're trying to ask questions such that they are the one who says it. So I never really agreed with this. So, well, then why did you say that in the meeting? Again, not mad, confused. So then I'm confused. Why would you stand up in the meeting and say that you supported it if you didn't? Because now they're like in this ethical quandary. Like, how do they answer that question? They can't get mad at you, which is the normal response, right? Well, I don't know. It's too busy to me. Like you pushed this on us. We didn't even have a chance to do it. Like now they're, like, you want to take that off the table. So I'm confused. Why did you say that you agreed? And then you kind of follow the conversation there, trying to get them to self-recognize that they made a problem. And what you're looking for is there's going to be a flip where they're going to go, you're right. Look, I'm sorry. I should have brought this up, or I should have told you before I did this. I get it. Right. You want them to kind of flip and be like, yes, I get that I did something wrong and won't happen again, or next time I'll do this. So that's one way is you're kind of walking them through a self-realization that they made a mistake. Right. The other thing, which is more common, is that there is some extraneous reason that you did not know. So we all agreed that global data store, you created this thing for them. Why did you do that? Again, if angry, very hard to get. So I'm a little confused. Like, why did you start doing that? And you're like, well, I got a call from the managing director of that product who said they wanted it. And I asked my boss, he's like, just make them happy. So like, what am I supposed to do? Okay, so they weren't really backstabbing you. They weren't really doing anything. They actually got really stuck between the corporate strategy and this business person who just wants it their own way. And by asking the questions, you found that out before you kind of started going at them, because it's not really their fault, especially if they don't know how to handle that situation. Then you go, okay, thanks for sharing. Well, effectively, let me help you solve that problem. Can I do something? Can I call that head of product? I'd be an executive. Can I call them and talk to them? Oh, God, that would be super great. Could you totally do that? Because I don't like, nobody likes being stuck in the middle. So if you can get them out of the middle, very helpful. Right. And so again, this idea of, if somebody kind of screwed you, if somebody did something that didn't work, again, just my approach. So you obviously do what you want, but it's much more effective to approach it again with this kind of a little bit confused. Something's not adding up here. I'd like to hear your side of the story. I'd like to hear what happened, as opposed to how could you, right? Because oftentimes you get a lot more information. And if you do it right, you can actually gain, again, in this case over here, where you could say, let me get you out of the middle. I will fix it for you. If you do that, they suddenly trust you a lot more, right? So again, this idea of how do you navigate these sort of political relationships, right? Try not to make enemies. And the easiest way to do that is seek to kind of understand. That may be something, it's a Stephen Covey thing, but all those kind of things. How do you understand the situation before you sort of judge it, right? That's just a general mantra that is more powerful because people want to be understood. It's a very easy way to build relationships if you make sure that you're just listening and you're trying to help them navigate the scenario. Although sometimes they did do something that they shouldn't have done. And there you're trying to get them to self admit that they actually did something that they probably shouldn't have. And hopefully will do something different in the future. Right. So that's a lot. But generally, relationships, right? Try not to be too aggressive because it is a natural instinct, but it starts you from a negative perspective, and it's very hard to dig out of that if you need to. All right, last question for this one, and this is around results. Kind of someone who says, "I'm feeling disengaged from my current role. Any advice?" And this has also happened a couple times. I won't name the companies, but there are a couple common, well-known companies where, it's going, but it's not the same as it was a few years ago. What do you do? And the two things I would say here is, one is you want to think about what can you gain in the current role, right? And so you can think about it in, are there skills you can learn, knowledge, are there relationships you can build? Find something that you can actually gain. But then the second thing is, if you're just sort of feeling disengaged, it's okay to do kind of B plus work, right? Again, you don't want to get fired. Don't do C plus or D minus work, right? You don't get fired, but like, and again, I'm saying this as your coach, right? It's okay not to do A plus work all the time. especially if you're like not feeling it, you don't think the company is too bureaucratic, it's not there. Don't kill yourself trying to do A plus work. B plus work is fine in those scenarios because you're like, I don't know if I really want to be here. Like, don't waste your time trying to be the best if there's not a path, right? You don't have a target. But what I would say is take that time. So go to B plus work, but take that time to go find what you want. Right back to that first question, or maybe that was last week's question around, how do you find what you want to do? Right, do the B plus work, but then don't just sit there. Right, that's where people get stuck. Is they're like, I'm uninspired, but I don't want to do anything, so I just kind of sit here, and then months go by. Right, that's the scenario. That's the worst one. Don't do that. So bring it down a little bit and then use that other time to find out what you want to do. Go network, go talk to people, find something that's exciting, and then you can move towards that. So there you go. There's questions for this week. And as always, drop any others that you have. And I look forward to seeing you in the community, and we will talk next week. All right. See you, everybody.